Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. It's really nice to see that even on day 3, there are people still awake and interested, which is fantastic. I'm excited about that. I'm talking you through what happened with regard to privacy in Drupal CMS, which came as a surprise to all of us last year when Dries announced Drupal CMS. And then a couple of months later, there were tracks introduced, and they were looking for track leads for several topics. And I thought, there is privacy on the list. That's something I was dealing with for the last 10, 15 years already, mainly out of personal interest, because it is very important to myself, because I think it's important to our society. So a few words about myself. My name is Jurgenhaas. I'm based in south of Germany, co-founder of Lake Drops, one of the Drupal agencies. And I'm known as the maintainer of the ECA module. Lawrence is talking about it this afternoon. I can only recommend going to that one. And just recently, I also joined Sascha Eckenberger in maintaining the Gin admin theme, so you can imagine that times are pretty busy. Talking about being busy, we have some topics to go through, and this is what's between you and your lunch today. So I will be talking about the process, what was the objective, what is the landscape of privacy on this globe Earth. Like, it's not just a European perspective, of course. And the first thing I would like to get into is actually asking ourselves, does it really matter, right? Is it really important, and to understand why? And if we talk about privacy, we should make ourselves aware that we are talking about a fundamental right, which is the case for a lot of countries, if not most of the countries on this globe these days. And I think there is no reason to discuss whether fundamental rights are important or not. They are there, and we have to respect them. When it comes to data protection, it starts to become a little bit more weak, like why should we care? And we get into that in a minute as well, but we should really just be aware that we have to prevent real damages for people, and maybe even ourselves if we host a website that contains sensitive data. And being compliant is just an obligation to run a business. But it becomes fairly complicated because most countries have their own legislation. Some of them have none, but others have quite restrictive ones. And what makes things legally even more complicated is the fact that the provider of the content, I mean the site owner, is very often in a different country, i.e. in a different legislation than the visitor. And you can discuss to lawyers, talk to 2 of them, and you get 3 opinions, as you well know. Which legislation applies? Well, we will see. So, oh sorry, that was too fast. No, that goes to the wrong slide, so I have to use the keyboard instead. Excuse me. Now, again, why does it matter? Does it matter to respect fundamental rights? And I'm seriously asking that question because there are so many people, if you talk to them in private life, they're going to tell you, like, that happens to me a lot, well, I have nothing to hide. You know, why should I care? And I often argued with them, and I stopped doing that. I just fall back to that position to say, look, it is my fundamental right that others have to respect my privacy. And I just don't want to argue about that. It is my right, and that's why it's important, and everybody has to respect that. If you think that you have nothing to hide, well, good luck with that. I struggle to convince them otherwise, to be honest. With regard to data protection, I mean data that's stored on the server can be breached, can be stolen, can be sold, whatever. Why can that cause real damage? Well, everybody who ever experienced like identity theft, you probably can feel what it means and that this is a real serious problem. Fortunately, not all of us has gone through that, not even the majority of us. But just think about things like 23andMe. That breach is about 2 years old. Millions of people have their DNA data stored with that service. That breach was 2 years ago. That was already a big problem for a lot of people. They just filed for bankruptcy 4 weeks ago. Now the company and all the assets are for sale. Well, the assets are the DNA data of all of their customers. So that can cause real problems. And then we have legal obligations. And for a business, it's just a given that you have to respect them and try to be as compliant as possible. So what does it really matter for us as the Drupal community? So why do we have to think about it? Now, well, if we develop a product like Drupal CMS, are we as developers, as a community, as marketers of the services that we can provide, is it our role to discuss whether legislation makes sense or not? I would say the answer is simple, it's not our role. Not in the position where we are developing a product. Of course we should care about legislation and what happens with our society, but not while we are developing technology and a product. What is our obligation though is we want to provide a product that allows our customers to follow the rules, to be compliant, to not break the law. And we should help them to make that as easy as possible. That is our objective, that's what we should be doing. And don't forget about what Dries mentions quite often, is he's talking about the open web. In particular, he has done that in Atlanta in his keynote at the very end, and he was saying like, the open web needs Drupal. The open web needs the Drupal community because we have always been that community that has taken that very serious, moves it forward and supports that a lot. And there is no open web without privacy, without respecting the choices of the users. I think that's really, really important. However, things are changing so quickly, and that makes developing something like privacy settings, data protection, compliance with law so difficult. They are changing a lot, and not only the law is changing, but also the websites themselves. So we cannot imagine to build something which is a static solution that is maybe compliant on day one, but what happens afterwards? Well, things are changing, and suddenly users rely on us telling them just install Drupal CMS and everything is fine. We should not try and produce that impression. So how can we possibly go about that? And there is a woman, she's very famous in writing books in that topic area. Unfortunately, she stopped doing that. She's now doing other things. You probably heard about Heather Burns before. And I found quite a few quotes from her where she brings stuff to the point, in my view, especially this one, and I want to read it out because it means a lot to me, and it meant a lot to our working group that I'm going to introduce in a minute. She says, a user's privacy protection should never be contingent on the presence or the absence of a privacy regulation which has formalized those principles into law. I think this is really, really key. It's not about that we analyze, for example, GDPR or any other legislation and identify what needs to be done. We need to inhale what privacy and data protection wants to achieve. And this should be the guidance for us to develop products and services. However, we talk about a global product, and in most minds, what does exist is regulation in Europe and in California. This is the public opinion. You know, everybody else just doesn't care. Europeans have taken it very far, and the California legislation kind of followed. But the rest of the world just doesn't care. Well, think again. This is a map from a law consultancy firm that acts globally, and this is a heat map on how strong privacy regulation is in different countries of the world. And there is almost no country left that has no kind of red color. So everybody has something. And there are more countries that have really heavy regulation that I was even surprised. I didn't know that myself. And I find that very, very promising. What we've also done is we've done some interviews with Drupal experts on all continents, including Australia and Japan, and well, we missed Africa, I have to admit, but we have spoken to many, many people. What their expectation is, what we should provide as privacy features for a product like Drupal CMS. And I was so surprised that all of them, without exclusion, told us that RFPs nowadays, even in New Zealand, require GDPR compliance, which is very interesting. So what we learned from that is there is much more attention being spent on that topic, which is promising and makes us really happy in a way. But still, how should we go about developing something for Drupal CMS? Should we build a GDPR version of that? Well, we Europeans, we really managed to screw it up, I think. You know, is there a bad reputation for a topic like this? Yes, and we have created it. If you talk to anybody outside of Europe, and of course also inside of Europe, everybody talks about cookie banners and everybody hates them, and everybody tries to avoid them wherever possible. There are now browser plugins, they just manage it for you that you're never going to see them ever again. Now, what's the achievement? Nothing, or probably even a negative effect, right? But the fact is, if you look into the regulation that came out of the EU, that's actually pretty good. Where we failed is in the implementation part of everything. I can remember back in 2018, it was literally like 2 months before the deadline, all the clients showed up and said, oh, we just learned we need to be GDPR compliant in May of this year. And everybody was running out of time, and the consultants, the law firms and so on, they just told everybody, you know what you should be doing is put a cookie banner on it, go with it, and everything is okay. Nobody understood what was going on. They just followed terrible legal advice. My personal opinion, but I think that's been shared by a lot of people. So Europe didn't get it right. What about California? Well, it's almost the same, just a little bit more beautiful, which is because of the landscape, I think. So should we probably build default config for every single country, region in the world? Because they are all so different? Well, that will never happen. Why? Because it's just impossible. We can't hardly build one that is, you know, just for GDPR. How should we ever be able to do that for multiple countries? So let's go back to what Heather has to say about that. And she starts with, one phrase you will never hear me use is GDPR compliant. And before I continue, I would like to emphasize that GDPR in this case is just a placeholder for any other legislation that you could just put into that place. And she continues, why would she never use GDPR compliance? Because it's impossible. So not even can we build anything for every single country in the world. We can't even build something which makes you GDPR compliant just in Europe. It's just not possible. And why? Because GDPR compliance is not a status. It's a system, it's a process, it's procedures. I would like to add, it's a mindset. She calls it a journey. You never get to a destination, you are always on the move. And that journey, for what it's worth, should be taken from a positive view of user protection and not from a negative view of compliance as a regulatory threat. So that's about the reason why we should be doing this. It's not because we have to be compliant. We should do it because we want to do something good for our users and to ourselves, because we are users as well, aren't we? So don't think in terms of becoming compliant. Think instead of how to work towards a healthy regard for user privacy using GDPR as a roadmap every day. And then the final one in blue, and while you are on that journey, be very careful when you talk to people that tell you, follow me and I get you to the state where you are compliant. It's not a state. So with that in mind, let's see what we would be doing for Drupal CMS. That was a journey for us, which was only 6 months. Very short period of time. We knew there is a deadline. Launch date January 15th, but there was a beta freeze in late November already, so time was pretty short. We had to act quick, and we had the objective to provide default settings for the main target audience, which are marketeers. And that allows them to become compliant with regulations. But it's very obvious there are conflicting interests. A marketeer doesn't really care about privacy and data protection because their job is different. Their job is to get the message out, make the site beautiful, put content into it. If they also had to care about all the settings for privacy, they would be just overwhelmed. They can't do that. Their company, or if they have a legal department, they probably care about it, but they have no idea how they should go about it. And then on the other hand, users who are eventually visiting the site, their main interest is to navigate the site. They would like to have a nice user experience, clicking around, and they don't want to be interrupted by stuff that gets into their way. So that is quite a challenge. And I give you some insights on how we went about all that. So we broke it down into 3 main blocks. That was step number 1. There is consent management, there is data protection, and there are ongoing audits. Why that? Because we are on a journey. We can't just do something out of the box. We have to make sure it's still okay tomorrow, next week, or next year. So let's go into the first building block now, consent management. And I'm talking about consent management deliberately. I'm avoiding the word cookie, because most people have cookies in mind. But it's not about cookies. There is so much more about it. It's about storing data in the user's browser. Whether that's a cookie or that's local storage, it doesn't matter. The legislation in most countries is about storing data in the user's browser. You can't do that without prior consent by the user. It's about storing data on the server. You shouldn't do that without your user consenting into that beforehand. Transferring data to third parties, like your the IP address of the visitor. You should not do that without prior consent. Creating profiles, selling data, and so on and so forth. So, as I said, that's not about cookies. The scope is much broader. And the question is, how many websites really require consent management? I don't have official numbers, but I have a gut feeling. It's maybe 5% at most. And how many of them get it right? I would say almost none of them. If you look at the example, that is a German news outlet, Spiegel, pretty popular. What they are doing with their consent management widget, I would call it a paywall. That's not consent management. They are asking you to pay with your data before you can consume their content. And this is just wrong. This is not how it should be. And our goal as a working group has been, we should be getting it right. We should show the world how it can be done such that it becomes a positive thing and not an annoyance, what it is so far for most people. So we got into that and got surprised as we found almost 50 different modules on Drupal.org that in some extent deal with consent management. That was amazing. So what we did was just define some criteria how we can possibly select the technology that is good for Drupal CMS moving forward. So there was things like maintenance status, is it compatible with Drupal 11? Does it use external libraries, and if any, are they open source? They should not require paid services, and ideally they should not require any user accounts with external services either. And applying all those criteria, we ended up with 3 potential candidates. And what happened next was it just dusted quickly. It just disappeared because for several reasons. The first one was true back then and is not true any longer. There is a special story about that. You and I, we had quite a journey, a hide and seek game for a couple of weeks. There is a very famous module called cookies. Back then, it used a non-open source JavaScript library to make everything work. We had to decide it's not possible for us to use that. This has changed since, but still back then we couldn't go with that one. Then we came across, well, everybody knew before anyways, the very famous EU cookie compliance module. They had, I think last year, something like 90,000 reported Drupal websites, which is one of the top 100 modules by that. But we spoke to the maintainers of it, and they gave us kind of the feeling like it's great, but before it gets more, widespread usage, even beyond those 90,000 users, they would like to rewrite the module. Because they started in a hurry back in 2018, and they built new stuff ever since into that module, and it just grew out of their hands a little bit. And they said, we do have a budget, we do have knowledge, we do have developers, we want to contribute, but we can't recommend using that module as it is for something like Drupal CMS. And that was for us a bit like, oh my goodness, what are we doing next, right? And to be perfectly honest, there has been a meeting in October last year where I thought, and the team on the call, I got the impression kind of similarly, we probably may have to give up. It's just not possible in that short period of time to deliver something. And then we got really, really lucky. At the end of that call, one of the participants, Kai from Toyo, that's a company, a Drupal agency in Constance, he mentioned that they use one of those modules that we excluded because of the fact they have paid services. And he said, well, we are using that for all our customer websites, and they do have a free version, which is completely open source, and there is no reason you have to go for the paid tier at any situation at all. So we said, okay, so we should probably give that another try and look a second time. And we found actually a hidden champion. There was somebody in Germany, they developed the integration between that Claro library and Drupal with a module, and they only had something like 250 installations back then, so really tiny, small. You are not quite sure how good it is. We looked at the website, and it's really, really open source. So it's BSD3 licensed. There is no reason you have to sign up for an account or one of the paid tiers. You can use it completely free. There is an organization, a non-profit organization behind the whole thing. So that was another indicator where we thought, yeah, that's quite set up nicely so that moving forward, that has a chance to survive. And it just ticked all the boxes. All the requirements were fulfilled. The integration was great. The maintenance was fantastic. There was just one issue. We now have in Drupal landscape a Claro with C, and we have a Claro with K. But we thought we can probably live with that. And then something very special happened. And I would like to take a moment to talk about that as well, because I get goosebumps talking about it. It is something that makes me so proud to be part of the Drupal community, because I haven't seen things like that anywhere else before. I think we all together, we just understood how collaboration works, and we practice it every single day. And I think we are doing really great, and everybody should be so proud of it. So what happened? So we spoke to the maintainers of Claro, and we spoke to the maintainers of the other candidates that didn't actually make it. And what happened then was that they said, look, in terms of EU cookie compliance, instead of rewriting that module, why don't we just move over, help the Claro team to make that even better, and help them maintain that one? And on top of that, they even suggested, hey, we could actually provide a migration path for the 90,000 installations to make it easy for them to just switch over to the new, potentially de facto standard moving forward in the Drupal landscape. And I was really, really impressed. I would have never expected that to happen, and I was so grateful for everything. We already took the champagne out of the fridge and found on a Monday morning a comment on Slack from somebody that none of us knew before. And it was something like, well, that's disappointing news. And I thought, that sounds really frustrated. And I wanted to know more about it. So I pinged the guy and learned that he's an engineer with an industry company in New Zealand. They are using EU cookie compliance, and his manager tasked him to go into maintenance, and he spent 2 months prior to that date to do maintenance work contribution. And he learned that Monday morning, his time, that was all throwaway work. And even worse, he had to explain to his manager why the last 2 months were paid for nothing, right? So I said, let's get on a call. So we started Zoom, got on a call, talked to each other, and I explained what was going on. And he said, you know what, this helps me a lot, because when I saw that, I thought everybody was watching me doing that maintenance work, and deliberately they knew that this was throwaway stuff, and nobody told me and stopped me doing that. Now I understand everything you have been doing happened within the last 3 working days. And he said, I'm so glad you told me that, and I have no problem whatsoever. I go to my manager, explain it to them, and ask for a budget to help Claro to get even better. And I said, okay, get the champagne out again. It's time for that now. It was a nice experience. I would like the whole world to know about that, because this is what makes Drupal special. This makes it really, really great. But I would also like to use the opportunity to give a shout out to Jan Kellerman. He is the CTO of Work21, an agency in the north of Germany. He's doing an amazing job with maintenance. You imagine, I called him mid-October and said, look, we envisioned to select your module for Drupal CMS. He knew nothing about it, and overnight he rescheduled everything, and whatever we came up with, he was ready to just build that into the module. Very, very responsive, great maintenance, fantastic stuff. Now, talking about team and teamwork, I would like to shout out to all the people who have been in that team for 6 months. There are 9 individuals from 6 Drupal agencies from 6 different countries. There is Dropsolid involved, there is Lake Drops, Rumsalt, Toyo, Work21, Acolono. Those are the 6 agencies that actually funded all of that work, and that was quite a lot, so thanks for all of them. So what we've done is setting up default configuration for Drupal CMS on a global scale in a way that it just works. It's invisible and non-intrusive. Nobody recognizes it. It automatically reconfigures itself if new services get installed on the website, so it grows with the site. The widgets only take action if really required, so it's not something like, well, there is a consent management widget that shows up every time. It only comes up if it's really needed and required. It comes with a privacy policy node, which is empty, and we had lots of discussions. Should we put some boilerplate text into that? And we've decided not to do that. Why? Because we have seen so many sites that if you deliver some default content, there are published sites 5 years down the road still just having that default content, and we have to increase the pressure to make people aware that they have to write up their own privacy policy. More to that in a minute, because we have a forthcoming solution for this as well. And there are no, really, literally none, third-party components that get loaded when somebody visits a Drupal CMS site. And I think this is really leading the crowd. You know, Drupal is doing it right, Drupal is doing it how it should be, and others will hopefully follow. It goes to the extent that we even got issues created where somebody was setting up a Drupal CMS site and their manager just phoned them and said, look, something is missing. There needs to be a widget or a banner or something. And explaining them, no, it's not needed. As long as there is no cookie being stored, why would you need consent management? Only if stuff is needed, then ask for consent, not the other way around. So this is how a fresh Drupal CMS site looks like. And yes, there is no widget, there is no banner, there is nothing getting in between the user and a nice experience. Until, as an example, somebody decides to upload or create a media entity for a remote hosted video on, for example, YouTube. And after that, the front page still almost looks exactly the same, with a small difference, which is a link in the footer. And if I zoom in, oh, it doesn't zoom in for you, that's a shame. Let me try that on the other screen. Yeah, there it goes. So that's a new link that appeared automatically, simply because Drupal CMS recognized there is now a video which is remote that requires the user to give consent to load that video because they can actually watch it. Now let's go back. And it's on the way to be compliant. I'm careful with that phrasing because I don't want to give the impression to anyone that we provide a legal guarantee that if they follow our advice that they are compliant. There is still a task to check them individually in their individual circumstances. Now the widget that comes up if you click on privacy settings is quite well organized. It's very easy to understand. Most people know stuff like that anyway, but it only shows up if the user is deliberately asking for it. How does the page look like where the video is being embedded until, well, while the user has not given consent yet? There is the thumbnail loaded of the video, and that's not coming from the remote server. That's available locally on the Drupal site, so there is no legal issue with that at all. And there is an overlay where the user can instantaneously give consent so that they can follow the video, and once they've given that, the video will be loaded and they can actually play the video in place. There is no page reload involved or anything. It should be nice for the users. Sounds like we got something right here. Thank you. But then the user suddenly decides to, because they visited Martin's session an hour ago and applied the events recipe, which comes with additional stuff that requires consent from the user. And they probably also applied the Google Analytics tool because they want to measure how users are using their site. Now with that, this is something where we had, well, I expected much more difficult discussions with the team that implemented analytics. But they bought into the idea that we said, look, it needs to be opt-in. So by default, you have analytics installed, but no tracking is happening. Which is a user ever going to freely giving consent to be tracked? I don't know. So we came up with a kind of a compromise and said, look, only if Google Analytics is installed, or a similar one like Pivik or Matomo or any of the others, then we show up the widget on the bottom right corner of the page, which gets into the eyes of the visitor more proactively, if that's the right phrase. Like, we really asked them deliberately, do you want to give consent to be tracked by Google Analytics? To be honest, I'm pretty sure this is not how it's going to be for a long time on websites. Marketeers will most likely argue that we have to have it, let's make it opt out. Whether this is compliant with their legislation, we can't tell, we shouldn't judge. The default is as it is, and people can change it if they want to or if they have to. Now, if things like that, events, locations, Google Analytics, remote videos, the widget becomes more complex, but it's still usable by all the users, and this one collapses everything. You know, in Claro, services are grouped by purposes. There is tracking, there is remote content, there is technically required stuff. And by default, those purposes are collapsed. So you still see only 3 of them. And only if you are interested in detail, you can open the collapsed containers and see which services are underneath each of them. Talking about events and location stuff with mapping, here we have the same thing. Maps are not being loaded from the remote server. There is an overlay as well. User can provide consent, and the map is loaded and can be navigated. And moving on, Claro is really, really smart, I think. For instance, if the user has given consent last week for some of the services that have been available at that time, now they come back to the website, they would normally not see the widget on the bottom right corner because the consent has already been given and stored in their browser, assuming the cookie survives that long. But if in the meantime, the website owner installed a new service that wasn't there when the user gave consent last time, the user most likely wants to make another decision on that. And that's where Claro automatically pops up and says, since your last visit, there has been a new service. Please make your mind up and make a decision on whether you want to give consent for that one as well or not. And then last but not least, for that section, the AI chatbot, which is normally only available on admin pages out of the box in Drupal CMS. There, the same thing happens, that the chatbot is overlaid by the consent management widget. The user can give their consent and the chatbot changes immediately and they can shoot off and use it. And as I mentioned before, there is a lot of settings in Claro, and I think the Claro settings site is very well organized, and even more so, it's really well documented. And that leads me to the next topic, which is talking about documentation. The Claro team has done a great job, and that's the screenshot on the right, documenting the module itself, and not only explaining the features, but also the legal reasons behind it, why that feature is there and what it really does. But then we also have documentation which is Drupal CMS specific, and I would like to thank Amber Himes-Matz and Joe Schindler from Drupalize Me. They have done a great job in writing up all the stuff that we have developed and configured. It was like of some interviews between them and us, and I was so happy when I saw that documentation because it works so well. So what's next? We can see consent management has been completed, but there is a sub-item which is legal content. I mentioned the privacy policy node, which is empty by default. Who should actually be the one that provides content for that? Well, what I know for sure is it's not us. And if I say us, I mean us as a Drupal community, because we can't do that. We shouldn't even try. We are no legal experts, and we don't have the capacity to deliver that for each individual site and keep it up to date. We can leave it to the site owner, but that means that's probably inefficient because every single one is doing very similar stuff, asking for advice externally and then write up, hopefully, what is required. But there's a third option, which is there are service companies out there providing that as online services. So we are now in discussion with them, and there will be, and that's the issue number for the meta issue, like we are developing a legal content API in Drupal, which allows external services to intercommunicate with a website, finding out what services are installed, what is required for the privacy policy, and maybe other documents as well. And then automatically, depending upon where they are based, injecting the right content for that website. Of course, that will be a paid service, but we provide the technical infrastructure so that users of Drupal can reach out and find the right service provider who hopefully does it for them fully automatically and keeps the site up to date. Then the next topic will be data protection and then ongoing audits. So what about data protection? I have to hurry up a bit, running out of time. One of the 3 candidates for consent management was the so-called GDPR module. Some of you may know that one. It doesn't actually have anything about consent management, it only has interface to it, but what it does have is stuff like identifying data fields in Drupal that carry PII, personally identifiable information. And on top of that, they can then create reports on request for individual users who want to know what is stored about myself on a particular website. That is a feature in that module. And number 3 is then that a user can request, please delete everything you know about me, which if somebody goes to a Drupal site owner nowadays, most of them will probably struggle because they don't know how to do that. They would like to comply with that request, but there is no technical measure or means to actually do that. So our plan is to provide a suite of tools. And fortunately, we found the maintainer of that part in the GDPR module. He's called Jan Lötzer. He's from FreelyGive, and he is happy with the idea to extract those features out of GDPR and make it a fresh, well-maintained suite of modules that will hopefully become part of Drupal CMS 2.0 later this year. And then last but not least, a reminder to Heather Burns. She's talking about it's a journey, not the destination, which means we need to help website owners to stay compliant. And how can we do that? I believe only by analyzing a website every now and then, maybe daily, maybe weekly, once a month, who knows, and give them a dashboard with information. What's the current status? Is there some identified risk somewhere? Together with recommendations on what they could do, how they should go about it, and where they can probably find additional information about the issue and how to deal with it. So that's the audit feature that we are going to plan later on. Skipping over that, that's what I already mentioned. So it's time to wrap up. Let's conclude. We are talking about fundamental rights. I just repeat that because I find it important. It's not just a technical feature, it's something that's really important. It's a permanent process. We are never there, we are always on a journey, it's always on a trip. However, we should learn from this exercise. Privacy and data protection doesn't have to get into your way to provide nice user experience. So far, that's not our experience on the web, but with Drupal, we are now able to sell that as a feature to clients. And I think this is so important. People have a lot to learn, and there is a lot of positive stuff that they can learn. And I hope we got that message across. Other stuff like data protection, and ongoing audits will follow suit. So that's mainly it. Before we go into Q&A, I just have a collection of all the links that have been used on all of the slides. But you don't have to remember them all, just use the privacy Leuven 2025. The slides are online, you can just navigate them there, click on all the links, and you get to all the destinations. And there are two of them, the current activity, Legal Content API, and the PII module suite. This is where we are currently working on. And if anybody wants to join in, you are more than welcome. So now it's time for Q&A. I would like to thank my sponsors at that point as well, because I need them to allow me to do that work for the community. And I'm, of course, looking for more sponsors as well. So there are links for all of that. But for now, thanks for your interest, and I'll shoot off with all your questions.
Thank you so much for that talk. That is going to solve so many nightmares, I think, and headaches. I'm not at the point yet where I'm using Drupal CMS, certainly not for anything production. I see there is a module on Drupal.org that is Drupal 10 and 11 compatible. Is that actually the same module, or is it a different version? Will it give me the same functionality?
You may probably talk about the module called Claro. Where is it? Over there? No, that's about documentation. The module itself is somewhere over there. Here it is. There is the link to the Claro module. If that's the one you are referring to, yes, that's the module. You can install that on every Drupal site, but you can go even further than that. The beauty about recipes that have been used to build Drupal CMS can be applied on other Drupal sites as well. So you may probably want to find the Drupal CMS _privacy recipe, and you can apply that to your Drupal site so that you not only get the Claro module, but all the default settings that we came up with as well. And that can be used on any Drupal site. It's not limited to Drupal CMS. That's brilliant, thank you. And that will sort out the Google Consent Mode v2 issues, will it? As well, yes. Thank you so much. Yeah. Welcome.
At the moment, you show a screen when you want to try to watch a YouTube video, but YouTube has also a no cookie mode. Was there a discussion to go for the no cookie mode by default instead of like adding an intrusive pop-up? Because that's what we're doing at our own project. We just like block all the cookies for embedded videos. I'm not sure I fully understand. Yeah, you have like youtube.com, but you also have like youtube-nocookie.com, and it's the same video but with no cookies. So then you don't have the pop-up, then you don't have to like give consent and stuff like that. Okay. So it's way easier than... You are saying there is a way to embed videos without having the trouble with the cookies on YouTube. That is an option where we learned that there are not always stable connections for that, and YouTube is actually trying hard to make it impossible to use that. So this is a kind of a cat and mouse game. Yeah, but it's something YouTube has embedded inside their system. It's like the same URL from YouTube, from Google. Okay, so we may probably, with regard to YouTube videos, actually change or add a new option for that. That's perfectly possible to build that into the Claro module. Okay. There are other remote video services like Vimeo, for example, where that's probably not available. But yeah, things are changing all the time, so we are happy to append that into the default setting if possible. Okay. There is one over here.
For the legal content API, you talked about working with external service providers. I know at least one of them offers a referral fee.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a plan for capturing that referral fee and utilizing that somehow for either, I'll just stop and let you talk.
Okay, thank you. We are aware of that, but we are not that far into the project yet to having made our mind up on that, because we just learned from a few discussions the last couple of weeks that there are probably many dozens of service providers doing that, and there are very serious ones that raise concerns that if there is a list on Drupal.org that says, if you use that API, here is a list of potential service providers, they find that there is an unfair competition because there are service providers that offer that for $5 a month or something like that. And the quality they provide is really, really bad. Well, they are just not providing compliance or whatsoever. So the question to start with was, should we even recommend or have a list, forget about recommendation, should we even have a list of potential service providers or leave it to the users to find them themselves? Or should we come up with some criteria that they have to meet before they get on the list? I would prefer the second one, but I can see that this can be slippery slope as well. We make ourselves, well, there's a tax service for us, and if I say us, I believe that's probably a role for the DA, because they are providing the hosting service, the infrastructure and everything. And then on top of that, if there is a referral fee, I would really like to capture that, and I believe that should go into the DA then. Okay, we are over time. Thank you for your attention. Enjoy lunch and have a nice rest of Dev Days. Thank you.